Check, check, check. I don't usually have this on at the beginning, but I have no idea if this thing's going to work. Facebook's been blocking me, and still having that little DMCA issue. I haven't seen it in a couple days though, so knock on wood. Maybe I'm okay now. Who's here? Make sure I leave my mic on this time. Sorry about that. Who's that out there already? Wait, who are they trying to get to take down? The YouTube, not YouTuber Law, some other law channel. Ugh. Hello and welcome to Evidence-Based Audio number 173, and this is Everyone is Now Dumber After Hearing You. And what now, some Adam Sandler movie, it's an academic decathlon, and it's a really good speech. And that's how I feel sometimes when we get advice from the gurus, right? So let me get to what we got first. Hopefully audio's coming through. I know it's been a little goofy lately, and if somebody can check that for me. So first of all, there's a thread at the Gear page, and it's up to 20 pages about latency of these digital modeling systems like the Helix or the Kemper Floor or Kempers, or all the multi-effects processors. Yeah, in fact, when did that happen? When did we stop calling them multi-effects processors and start calling them guitar modelers? I mean, in some ways they were modeling back then. I know we didn't really use the term modeling until quite a while later. Let me just get to this right here. So it's just called Latency Test 23 amp modeling pedal boards compared, Quad Cortex versus FM3 versus Helix versus Boss versus. One thing that's kind of interesting in here is all these micro pedal boards, and there's so much software and development behind things like Helix and Bias, XFX, and all that. But the DSP is kind of out there, so I remember when Moore was putting out those little boards, that there's no reason that these things can't be absolutely awesome. And honestly, for much cheaper than the Helix today, you could make a really small one that was way more powerful than it, So it's really an interesting time to be in. Do you buy this thing that's probably not going to have a long shelf life, but is likely capable of doing everything you have to do? You're just going to have to reprogram a new one when this one finally loses its end of life or whatever. But maybe not. If we came up with the universal librarian system, boy, I should shut up. We'll talk about that later, maybe when we're making something like that. You heard it here first, folks. Anyway, this guy's name is Leo Gibson. It says, that sounds weird. In this video, we will check out the latency of 23 amp modeling pedal boards, and let's just see how this goes. And you please don't DMCA me. Come on.
Hello everybody, my name is Leo and this video is gonna be very interesting.
Okay, so I guess it's Lao. And given the nature of hype and clickbait and all this stuff of these channels, it's hard not to just immediately think, is this guy's accent for real or what? Let's just see what this is.
We will check out the latency of 23 amp modeling pedalboards. Yes, 23. In my channel I'm getting a lot of questions about how amp modeling pedalboards feels, how they respond to our touch, etc. For sure, the feel of an amp or of an amp modeler is something personal, but in the last years, with all the reviews and comparisons that I've done in the...
Okay, don't let me forget, because there's something very important about latency in these modeling things. Yeah, I come up with, it's kind of going at it with the latency purists, but in this case, this is even weirder, but I'll get to that.
Channel and the exchange of opinions that we have had together, I've matured the idea that the feel can be articulated in...
So there's some idea that, part of the feel problem in certain devices is latency.
First of all, let me spend a few more words about latency. What is exactly latency and why it is so important? Well, real amps are all analog, so they respond basically immediately when we pick a note.
I'm not believing. Is this a, like, you guys who know this channel better, is this a joke or is this for real?
Obviously, without considering that the sound wave produced by the speaker as modeler take time, and this time is called latency. Then, once the signal has been translated once again to analog, it has to be sent to the...
Oh, good. So he's showing, the converter latency as well, which people seem to forget most of the time.
Speaker in order to be heard, like for the real amp. Now, some of us are pretty sensible to latency, and therefore they are searching for the modeler which has the faster response to their touch. Well, in this
see how he did the test.
Let me now describe how I have set up the test. First of all, I already did a similar video more than 1 year ago, and in this new test, I have, in my opinion, improved the methodology. Furthermore, of course, basically all the units have received at least a firmware upgrade and a lot of new modelers have been released. Therefore, the results have changed a lot. Audio workstation with the cable I've used in order to feed the modelers. In this way, I have checked out if there is some latency introduced by the signal path without...
I wonder, impulses, like, you might not get past the gate, if in case there's a gate that you don't know about. There might be something that messes you up if you're using an impulse, but I mean, that's the way to go. But if you have a longer signal where you can actually identify different parts of it, should be good. But maybe it's obvious if the impulse comes out weird.
To the modelers, and actually there is not, as you may notice from the original impulse and the recorded wave. Then I have loaded in each modeler a simulation of a Fender Deluxe Reverb and the relevant...
Yeah, that's another question. Does the latency go up the more effects you put in? I noticed in Helix Native, sometimes there's latency and sometimes there's not. So I'm thinking there's certain plugins that add latency, or certain blocks, models, whatever you call them, that add latency and certain ones that don't. So let me go on here.
Cab without anything else. Now this graph represents all the latencies measured for each...
Okay, we're gonna take a look at this in a second, but see what this my 2 cents is.
Final considerations here. First of all, let me say that I'm not very sensible to latency, as I have played a lot of MIDI guitar in the past that introduces a lot of latency, and you are obliged to adapt your playing to the latency. And honestly, I have no problem in playing any of these modelers. I play very comfortable.
There you go. And there you go. I know that if I make my latency too high, when I'm, going through native plugins and going through all the ASIO latency and everything else, that I get upset-ish. But at any reasonable speed, and even then, I can usually get along. But like you said, any of the modelers, they're so much lower than going through a computer. I'm pretty sure. We're gonna look. So here's the printed results here. So lowest latency, and I'm really not sure. Wow, actually, you know what? I got to take this back. According to this, there is some with higher latency than the than you would get out of your computer, even with the pretty crappy audio interface. Interesting. Okay, so the Boss GT1000 is the fastest, and along with the 100. And he has it kind of color-coded to budget pedal boards, mid-price pedal boards, high-end. Strymon. Okay, so there's Nux Amp Academy, and I think this is one of those things that we were talking about earlier. It's just kind of a micro thing. And who knows? It's all up to the software, because these guys could add the right software. Remember back in the day, the holy grail was these was the harmonizer, right? If you could get a harmonizer into your thing, you had all the DSP you needed. I'm not sure what this thing does. Amp Academy, Amp Modeler, Guitar Pedal, 1024 samples IR. So I don't think this thing does like all crazy effects and stuff, but hey, looks pretty good. I bet you it's cool. Could be. Okay, so here's the Moore GE300 and GE250. Now these, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure these things are like multi-effects pedals. GE300. This looks like a serious piece of gear. Now, I don't know. That I remember these guys were hitting us up on Facebook pretty hard. A lot of the studio stuff. But this could be excellent. I'm not sure what the effects are. Let's see. Features. Does it have a harmonizer? How much DSP is it compared to like a Helix or whatever? Because this is newer, and there's no reason it couldn't have much more horsepower and it could be way better. Honestly, it's all up to the horsepower. If they didn't put it's not up to the horsepower. It's all up to the software, the DSP, whatever they did. If they didn't put enough time into that, then sure, there's a problem. But that's absolutely unreal. It's just there's not that much of a community that I've seen where they're talking about this, so that you can get the information back and forth. But how many times we talk about how bad Google is lately? Anyway, these could be awesome. These things don't cost much compared to. Let's see, what was the GE300 cost? Or they didn't. Maybe they're a lot now. Wow. Okay, never mind. These things are picking up in price here. Still, so it's like half the price of a Helix. So, their latency is pretty low. Line 6 HX Stomp. We're getting near the 2 milliseconds. Is this right? Is this 2 milliseconds that we're measuring here? Let me go back to the video and let's see if we can see what he's saying for the results.
For each modeler, and I will now reveal which is which, starting from the modeler that introduces the higher amount of latency, and then going through all of them until the modeler which has the quicker response. So in last position we have suspense the Ampero Stomp 2 with around 10 milliseconds.
Okay, so it is milliseconds.
The Ampero Stomp internal cab.
Sheesh. Have a look at my Reaper thing right here. So we're looking at, this is an RME. This is one of the faster interfaces. And this is where I'm happy to play at 128 samples. But if you look, it's 2.7 milliseconds on the way in, 3.7 on the way out. And so we're giving it, it's like 7-8 milliseconds of latency round trip. The whole point of hardware, you're going to get way better than that, so they say. And yet this thing is worse. And it says a mid-price pedal board. I wonder what that thing costs. Ampero, let's look. Ampero Stomp 2. Ampero 2 Stomp. Oh, $500. And that, wow. Okay, I think I'd buy a Pod Go instead. Yeah, speaking of which, so the HX, interesting, the HX effects, or HX Stomp is quicker. Zoom G11, the Helix, the Helix is slower than the More. So, like, I love when these gurus say you get what you pay for. This is the dumbest thing. You don't. If we're talking about latency, it looks like there's some budgets that'll absolutely smoke your mid-price stuff and some of the higher end stuff. And so here's now everybody says the fractals, so the FM3 maybe is way slower, but I remember them always trying to say that the fractal Axe effects was just like instant. Maybe it had converter latency or something. Quad Cortex has more latency than the Helix. Interesting. I wonder if it's just running a computer in there. Kemper Stage, more latency than the Helix. Headrush Gigboard, a lot more latency. We're talking computer latency at this point. Interesting. Harley Benton DNA Pro, which is says mid price. Kemper Stage. So we're not seeing the Axe effects or the original Kemper, but this is an interesting take on this. And one of the funny things is so, I was kind of in shock at this 10 milliseconds here, but a couple years ago, you may remember I was going around trying to figure out how to make a really mobile setup, using laptops or iPad or whatever. And I think the lowest latency we could get, lowest real round trip latency for a guitar player that I could get on the iPad at the time, I think was 22 milliseconds. It might have been 19 milliseconds, but whatever it was, it is like double the worst one on this list. And you have all these latency purists and hipsters and stuff who sit there and play their guitar through their iPhone at all the coffee shops, and they're just fine with that 20 milliseconds of latency. And so when you hear them going off about latency puritanism on the forums, just remember they were running 22 milliseconds or whatever on their iPhone. So it's important to keep in mind that no matter how sensitive you are to latency, you may be able to get along with it. I know, like people who play in orchestras, they really have a thing like that, because some of these orchestras can be so wide that you're talking quite a distance that you're supposed to be running the same timing as somebody else. Anyhow, this is at the gear page, or go to Leo Gibson's YouTube channel and check out latency test 23 amp modeling pedal boards compared, Quad Cortex versus FM3 versus that's a whole bunch of stuff on here. Interesting to see where the Helix sits here. What is that, around 2 milliseconds or so? So I think I get a faster time. Potentially I could go faster on the native one, couldn't I? But even still, 2 milliseconds round trip is very short. I know people say otherwise, but it's short. Okay. Next thing, I'm still looking on this FRFR things, and I saw the Kemper cabinet they're talking about. I'm like kind of tripping out. $540 for a 1x12. And I'm hoping this, is that actually even have an amp in it? Or is this just a cabinet? Like, is this really an unpowered cabinet for $500? Yeah, passive guitar cabinet. Yeah, ouch. Can you buy like a 412, a full 412 for that? And what is this? Is this really an FRFR? Has it got a tweeter in it? Kemper Cone 12-inch speaker. Maybe that's one of those Celestions that has the concentric driver, which is interesting. But man, these things cost a lot. And how much worse are the I really like my TS210 from Alto. And I know there's I have a 312 from Alto I haven't tried yet. And everybody says that they're too bassy, but I noticed that the Helix has a global EQ and you can sell it to only work on certain outputs. So I could actually try and dial that in. I still haven't tried it. I own two of those things. I bought them so the kids can have for their PA system. So yeah, TS312s. I was supposed to get TS315s, but Guitar Center, even though they said they were in stock, weren't in stock, Guitar Center. But I have them. I should try them out. I still haven't tried them out. I tried the TX, like the super cheap cabinet, and I don't know that it wasn't loud enough to like it's really cheap compared to like the TS series. But I got the 10-inch version for monitors for us, and I played my guitar through it, and it actually sounded pretty good. So I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just some kind of idiot, but it seems a lot to pay $540 for a passive cabinet. And I mean, I always hear the modeling guys talk about playing through Yamaha DXR 10s or these other things that, you could probably get one of those for around there, at least used. I was looking at the Power Cabs, which is Line 6's version. I don't care about this Power Cab Plus, but the one that they have, so you have Line 6 Power Cab 112. So this is not the Plus. It's still $600. So it's a little bit more, but this one actually at least has an amplifier in it. I don't know what all stuff it has. Like, I guess it has some. I thought this is the Plus. I guess this thing has these cool kickstands in the back so you can tilt it. Actually, the Power Cab wouldn't be so bad. I don't know if it's loud enough. I think people say it is, but it'd be nice to have the a 212 version that's not the Plus. But look at the prices, man. $1,400 for a 212. You think you could do a little bit better, but you look at this. So this is the one that everybody always talks about, the Atomic CLR. It's like a stage, like a wedge monitor. I'm not sure if it's a concentric or not, but it's 33 pounds and it's $1,000. And this is the one everybody talks about. But man, $1,000 for pretty much a stage monitor. Remember we were watching a video last week where the guy's like, "Oh, these are pretty much all floor wedges," that was Henning. And then here's the Friedman. It's another really popular one. It says it's 500 watts, and definitely Wolfer in a tweeter. I watched a video where this actually went well, but look at this plate amp. See, this looks very familiar to some of you guys, I'm sure. Man, these things are expensive. So I'm still, I should do a shootout of the TX210 and the TS310 and see just how much louder it is, because, going by specs, who knows, they could be lying, but let's see, TX310, I think it's called. And then I'm going to look at the TS210. And hopefully, it's a Legacy. Where's the SPL? $125 peak, 122 continuous. Okay, allegedly. Let's look at these. It says 1,100 watts or whatever it says. I got it sitting right next to me right now. Now the other one it says like it's 100 watts or something, or 350 watts. See, is this real 175 watts continuous? Because that's a hell of a lot of power. So that little cabinet is more than capable of annihilating things. But I don't think it's really that loud. It's just like what they call commercial watts versus real watts or whatever. Where's the spec sheet? So see if we can find the word SPL. 117. Okay, so this says this has a lot lower of max SPL, and this would be peak rather than continuous. So that's 8 decibels, which doesn't sound like much, but remember, like in this case, I think 6 decibels is double the power, double the, yeah. And I forget how that goes. Sorry. For you double the power, you get 6 decibels louder, right? But to double the volume, you need 10 times the power. I think that's right. And so that looks like it's a lot less, but I should put them next to each other and just see. And so this is the other one I got, is the where's the TS? Let's see, TS312. Let's see what it has to say. TS3. Now, I've seen everything I've seen shows that it's saying that it has way too much bass. But that's okay. We can fix that, hopefully. 131 peak, 128 continuous. So that's 3 decibels louder than the yeah, it's 3 decibels louder than the one I normally use. So that's 128 continuous. Ooh, no, that's 6 decibels louder. That's a lot louder. Okay, so I need to try this thing out. Well, we'll see just if this is even at all accurate. But if it is, man, that's a lot. We'll see, especially if that was all bass and I can just turn that down. We'll see. We shall see. So let me get these out of the way. Okay, so yeah, I don't know about this. What do you guys use on FRFRs? I heard, people are talking about the turbo sounds. Not that they're available right now, just like bike tires. There's no stock anywhere. But let me know what you guys are using on these for your FRFR. Full range flat response, or what we were talking about last time, full range guitar feel response or something. I forget what it was. Let's see. And, I was watching this thing with Rhett Schull, and I'm not exactly sure who this guy is, but I see him a lot on Helix videos, I think. And so I was looking at, why, do you guys actually use the power cabs? And so this thing's about why he prefers power cab when performing live. And I'm gonna speed this up because there's some stuff that drives me bonkers on here. Let's see.
Today we're going to be talking about power cab. That went a lot smoother in my head when I thought about doing this.
Check.
I started using it a few years ago. Around the same time I started using the Helix Live. And I think it solves a pretty big problem that a lot of guitar players have with modelers, especially in a live setting, which is that unless you're using some kind of cabinet, you don't have any stage volume whatsoever. So I've had a lot of success using the Helix Live, especially on things like festival gigs or when you're...
So this is a question. So when you guys, that don't have like professional sound guys following you around and everything, do you really trust the PA guy to give you enough in your monitors, or you bring something with you? Like you bring some kind of monitor cabinet or something so you can hear, right? I mean, I think this just sounds suicidal without that, but
you're playing opening slots, a gig where you don't have a ton of time to get on stage, get sound checked, place mics on a cabinet and do all the stuff that you would do with a normal amp. For me, the Helix works really well in that situation, but there's a few things with running just the Helix by itself that I don't typically enjoy. First of all, it's the monitoring. If you're on a wedge, for example, and all you have is the Helix going to front of house and then coming out of your wedge, you're essentially locked into that place on stage. You really can't.
Yeah, I don't get this. If you got a wedge, and they generally do fire up and not as much across, but it's no real difference than when you got an amp. I mean, the amp might have a little bit more dispersion, but you're still just as locked in place, I would say. Maybe a little bit less, but not all that much.
can't move around. If you move out of the firing line of your monitor wedge at all, you completely lose all of your guitar signal. Or if you're running in-ears, all you have is the guitar coming through your in-ears. You don't have anything behind you on stage giving you stage volume, which as a guitar player I think is really important to have, especially when you're playing with a really loud drummer and a bass player who's got an amp on stage. I think you need a cabinet on stage, no matter.
How do you sound guys like your if you're trying to do that silent stage thing and you got somebody who needs to have a really loud amp up on stage with you?
What type of rig you're running, but especially a modeler like the Helix, having a cabinet on stage, in my opinion, is really, really important. So for me, that's one issue that the Power Cab solved. Having the stage volume from the 112 by itself was enough for me to move around the stage, whether I was on a wedge or on in-ears, and actually feel my amp behind me. And run into, when using modelers live without a cabinet, is that you're missing out on a huge part of the sound of a guitar through a typical tube amp, which is...
Why is... Okay. This may just be a figure of speech or whatever, but why does everybody say tube amp? It's like... It's just dogmatic to this at this point that it must sound better if it has a tube in it than something else. No, it sounds good when you like how it sounds. Like that, but it's this standard, this weird standard that just won't go away. It's got to be a tube amp. The tube amp has something magical. Nothing. That's what we're trying to model is the tube amp. No, I mean sometimes, but how about just coming up with neat sounds? That's what happened when the first people used amps did. It wasn't that, oh man, this thing has tubes, let's make it into an amp. No, they said, hey, this amp sounds cool. Let's figure out how to turn the knobs until I like it, or what to do in front of it. And there's all kinds of things that can do that. It's just weird that we still are just so stuck in this crazy dogmatic mentality about this tube amp thing. And usually once people start saying that, they start making claims that don't really have dimension to them. Like you can't say, oh, it's this much bigger and this many inches, or it's up this much at 50 hertz or down that much at 35 hertz. They just kind of use weasel words. So let's see, because I'm going to back up a little bit.
Is the other problem that I think some guitar players run into when using modelers live without a cabinet is that you're missing out on a huge part of the sound of a guitar through a typical tube amp, which is the interaction between the speakers and the guitar, specifically the guitar's pickups. When you're using an amp on stage and you've got a 112 or a 212 or 412 pushing air, that is interacting with the guitar in real time, and essentially the amp becomes part of the instrument. You get, things like feedback, obviously, but even the way your notes come across and how your tone comes across is interacting with the guitar. The amp and the guitar are interacting in real time. And when you're using a modeler on its own, or you're using a tube amp off stage, it doesn't matter, it's kind of the same thing. You are eliminating that element, that interaction that happens between the guitar and the amp that is really, really musical.
Okay, so there's two different issues going on here. There's probably going to be a claim that the guitar cabinet speaker acts different than the FR, than the full range or the PA speakers. Maybe we should just start calling them PA speakers. But there's the claim that amp is going to act different. But then the other claim is that without having some sort of a acoustic, actually generating SPL up on stage with you, your guitar is not going to feed back from the amplifier, right? So it's not going to actually, there's not going to be that kind of interaction. And that's definitely true, but that's true no matter modeler or not. So that's more about your stage thing. So it makes sense, but just keep that in mind it's not a modeling limitation.
Especially when it's done well and you have a guitar player that knows how to utilize that connection, it becomes a huge musical part of the guitar's tone. And so for me, I found when I started using the Power Cab with the Helix, it brought that interaction back, and I was able to turn around and get feedback from my guitar when I wanted it. And it felt like I was using one of my tube amps. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about the
tube amp again. Am I supposed to get mad about that?
Power Cab specifically for this video was I've actually used other monitoring systems for modelers in the past. I've used straight up monitors like floor wedges as a cabinet. I've used some of the other sort of cabinet designed for modelers, and I've also used power amps with regular cabinets. So you have, the modeler and then a power amp and then a regular guitar cabinet. And each one of those kind of has its own drawback. Chief among them, using a wedge or a full range, like an FR cab on its own, it's not a guitar cabinet and it's not a guitar speaker. So it doesn't sound like a guitar amp. It doesn't sound like an amp plugged into a cab. It sounds like a modeler being amplified for stage volume. And to me, it just didn't really feel that great. I never really...
Okay. It sounds like you make a claim that this thing is different. If your guitar speaker is that much different than the studio monitors or whatever else you wrote this thing in, you'd be upset. You can say it acts different, but what is that actually going to mean? Is it going to sag different? Because if it throws off the frequency response drastically, dynamically, especially if the speaker's acting as a dynamic EQ, I think you'd be upset. So, like, you're making these claims that this is some different kind of thing. If you go on Line 6's website, in fact, if we go to the power cab, go to the specs here, go to power cab, we take any of them, shouldn't matter. I mean, I would like to have one, I think, but yeah, right here, active guitar speaker with 1-inch high frequency drivers. So it's gonna have does it have a 12? Eminence ceramic coaxial custom 1-inch Celestion CD 1000 1010 whatever. I don't know what this other speaker is. I think it's a 12-inch speaker, but it's got a tweeter. This speaker is doing a different thing than a normal guitar speaker does, and that's the whole point of your impulse response. Hold on, real quick. That's the nature of these live things, man. There's still a world to run. So one of the things is as things are just getting so much busier around here, we're having to get a lot more live sound gear for my cousin's business to doing the PA stuff, and he wanted to get, everybody likes the sound of those Soundcraft preamps around here for the live stuff rather than the X32 or whatever. But so he wanted to use those. Oh shoot! Hold on 1 second. No, never mind. He wanted to use those somehow with an X32 or a Wing or whatever. There's just so many more of the Behringers and Midas stuff out there. And I was looking, but they had I didn't see Dante on the stage boxes. They did have Maddie, but they had a different format. I don't know. I'd rather just use the X32 stuff, honestly, but we'll see. If you guys have successfully put a Soundcraft stage box on an X32, let me know how you did it. Was it Dante? Was it Maddie? Was it AES50? Is there a way to do that, actually? Anyway, so let me get back to this Rhett Shull guy here.
Really connected with that setup. The other way, which was modular power amp cabinet, was better, but you got this weird interaction with the solid state power amp between the modular and the cabinet.
Wait. So putting the modular, then a power amp, and then the guitar cabinet is making it sound weird. Because it's a solid state amp. This is a solid state amp inside this Line 6 power cab. What's the difference?
That didn't really feel right, especially when you were pushing the power amp a little bit harder, pushing the cabinet a little bit harder. It never really felt right. It never responded the way I was used to having a tube amp on a cabinet respond. But
there's a tube amp.
I like the power cab because it is essentially a guitar speaker. It is FR, but the construction of the speaker is as you would build any other guitar speaker in any other cabinet. And because of that...
Is that true? Why is that? That's an interesting claim. So this is the Eminence. Let me see what these things are. I think these are two different things here. Celestion. So here's the speaker from Celestion that's the high end of this thing. So they're not using Celestion's coax speaker. That's interesting. Why not? 30 watts continuous. So here's the high part. Not super bad. Pretty good dispersion, huh? Then the other part is an Eminence coaxial custom. So is this a three-way system? Eminence. See, I have no idea. Yeah, that was funny, right? It's my FR, and it's got a guitar voicing to it. I think there is that thing they're gonna say that it reacts like a guitar, like the reactance and the impedance and all that, and the curves. But one thing that we keep seeing, and I know these Fractal seems to be the ones who argue pretty hard about this. Speakers aren't as nonlinear as at least as I thought. I really thought that, man, these things are multi-band compressors. They're really multi-band compressors or dynamic EQs or whatever. But it just seems like no matter, even when you crank the hell out of them and they can't even move anymore, they're still pretty flat until they distort, and they just add their own crazy amount of distortion. You can really, really hear it. Yeah, even the ribbon speakers aren't flat, right? Let's see. Let's keep going here.
It resonates and responds like a real speaker does.
Okay, so that's it. It resonates and responds like a real speaker does. So damping, how much is having a loose damping gonna weird you out if you created all your presets on studio monitors or headphones or whatever? I'm not sure I want the loose damping, but I remember, what is the speakers, like the 25 watt Celestions or whatever that everybody said you had to have in your 412s. And I had a chance. What happened? I got a set of EVs. I don't even know if they were guitar speakers. They were just 12-inch, super high damping. I think they were maybe subwoofers. And man, when I put those on my guitar, my palm muting never sounded that good before. It just stopped, and I kind of liked it. So I'm not sure that I want it mushy, but I guess somebody could.
So all in all, I'm genuinely a big fan of the Power Cab, and I actually prefer the 112 over the 212. The 212 sounds great, and it's cool because you can actually run true stereo.
Yeah, it's like the Greenback 25s or whatever. That's the ones I had, and they sounded killer. They were the sound of what you expect to hear, but the difference between palm muting on them and then these Electro voices, it was so trippy.
Out of it. But for me, this thing is small, lightweight. You can throw it in the back of a trailer or back of a car super easily. It fits on just about any stage, and it's unbelievably loud. For a 112 cabinet, it is plenty loud enough to keep.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having one of these Power Cabs. I got the Altos right now. I'm sure they're fine, but I think this would be cool to have. But the claim, like some of these claims he's making, a little bit goofy. What do we got here? I have a teacher coming in. Okay, so let me just go on here. Now, this is another channel. Man, I've been doing so much guitar junk lately, and a lot of it's so Helix specific, but it's not really. But this is this guy, Jason Sadites or Sadite, something. And he, wait, sorry. Sorry. I learned a lot of Helix stuff from him. But it's a lot of times it's kind of clickbaity. I don't know. I don't want to say you're clickbait or whatever, but it's the little very long videos to say, hey, check out what I just learned. And you got to go through 15 minutes before you hear it. And I know that's the algorithm or whatever, but so I don't watch this stuff that much anymore. But he put out a video called Helix Tone Match Presets, Facts versus Myths. And you remember a couple weeks ago we were watching a video, and it was some guys showing how they were doing these making these Helix presets. It sounded pretty accurate. And as much as we get in these fights with the anti-preset nuts, I really like those Chop Tones Metallica stuff. The stuff, it just sounded so legit. Any guitar or whatever, they always say, oh, you don't going to have the same pickups and stuff. It's going to get pretty close. Sorry. But it was pretty incredible how close those Chop Tones ones were. And these guys, maybe theirs was good too, but the video was like how we make these presets, and then they didn't show how to make the presets. And I think that's the one this guy's actually talking about. So that's kind of entertaining. Let's see, Spoon Ninja. I use a GT12 T75 and a Carvin PS12 PA speaker and a 212, and ooh, the thump of a palm mute. Yeah, I figure any PA speaker is going to stop right away, right? So, or should. So anyway, so this guy's he's saying facts versus myths. And so one of the things that I always get into with this stuff is how nonlinear are nonlinear things. Like, it seems to me that there's kind of a basic distortion curve, and we can use it. Like, there's a video I made where I used our output limiter on our compressor plugin in order to make an amplifier using a matching EQ, and it sounded pretty damn good. So I always wonder how much nonlinearity really is there, and how nonlinear is the nonlinearity? Like, how different is it between different devices? And like we said with the speaker cabinets, it doesn't seem to be a multiband compressor the way you would think. And so when it comes to these profiling amps, and I know there's a couple things out there right now that are just in software, but there's hardware ones too. Some of them claim to be able to capture more than just what an impulse response would. And that's the claim of the Kemper, and that was also the claim of some of the other things. But I just don't know how much that's actually true. But let me just get going on this.
Lately, I've been receiving a fairly extraordinary number of questions on the topic of tone-matched presets or tone-matched presets. Seems to be this new thing. It really isn't anything new, as we'll discuss in this video. And I wanted to discuss this a little bit just because I've been getting so many questions about it. So I really wasn't aware of what was going on behind the scenes here, but I did look into it. So Brian and Bradford over at Worship Tutorials have been doing a thing that they call tone-match presets. And let me just say up front that I absolutely love everything Brian and Bradford do.
You know, one of these days I'm going to make a band called No Disclaimers, where we just don't go through a bunch of disclaimers of, yeah, I understand. How about just the principle of charity? Assume that somebody's speaking and assume the best possible interpretation of what they're saying, rather than having to just be all victimized all the time.
They're really wonderful folks. I've had little interaction with them online, always pleasant to deal with, and I really have nothing negative at all to say about them. I never watch any of those on YouTube normally, but I wanted to go see what they had to say about their process and how they're doing these tone match presets. And I watched their video, and I got to say, it was really well done. I don't think they misrepresented anything in that.
I think we could knock 4 minutes off this video by just getting rid of disclaimers.
Video. They're very honest about everything and very... I do want to say this, though. I haven't actually tried any of these tone match presets, whether from Worship Tutorials or from some other folks who are putting these out there. I know there are some other companies and folks putting them out, some that I've never even heard of the companies or looked into anything that they do. So I can't give a sound, different than what you might expect. I don't know, and I won't make a comment on that. But I did want to talk about kind of the myths versus facts. As we all know, once the internet gets rolling on a certain topic, a lot of misinformation can get rolling that was never even intended to be put out there. So as I mentioned, I watched the Worship Tutorials video, and I think Brian and Bradford did a really great job explaining it, but I think some people still came away from that maybe not even fully understanding what Brian and Bradford were trying to say. So today I'm going to talk about what these can...
Well, yeah, because they didn't show what they actually were doing. They're doing like some EQ matching or something.
And can't do, what they are actually doing, and how they're being made in great detail. So later in the video, after we discuss it a little bit, I'm going to go over to Cubase and show you how you can actually do this yourself if you have certain amplifiers. That's the big thing, is if you're trying to get it to sound like a particular amplifier, then you would have to have access to that amplifier and some decent outboard equipment to be able to do it, much in the same way as just shooting just a normal impulse response. Let's start here, though. Let's start with maybe some of the myths that I've seen floating around and in the discussions I've had with folks, kind of what they're maybe thinking about.
Ooh, skip the meta. Skip the meta.
These that are incorrect. Basically what you're getting with a tone match preset, and I'm talking Helix related here, you're going to get a preset that contains an impulse response, just like you would when you buy an impulse response from any other company who's capturing impulse responses of speaker cabinets. There's nothing new here. There's no new technology. It's the same thing we've always had. Now, when shooting an impulse response of a guitar cabinet, we tend to feed a test signal into a very neutral power amp, and then that sends it through that particular speaker cabinet with the speaker that's in it, with the microphone or microphones that we chose to place in a particular position in the room we're in, through the mic preamp and any outboard EQ we choose to put on it. We capture that, and then we create our impulse response from that. And the idea is that we impart the tone of that speaker. But I've talked about this before. We do all of that, and that's all very valid. But that's just one particular snapshot of that particular placement of that particular microphone in that particular room.
And that's all any model capture will ever be when you're talking about one particular speaker placement in one particular part of a room. That's not...
Anything that is kind of affecting the frequency domain of what's going to be picked up there is going to be imparted on that impulse response. And that's wonderful. But there's many other tones available from that same setup simply by maybe moving a microphone around.
As there would be no matter how you did the modeling, though.
What an impulse response can't do, and what any of these tone match presets can't do, is model the non-linearities of the amplifier that is claimed to be tone matched. Meaning that we are still at the mercy in the Helix of the non-linearities of the amp model that's in the preset. So if we were using, let's say,
and this is where I'm really been getting into a lot of research lately, like just like we were saying, just how nonlinear is nonlinear. Like, we know the curve is nonlinear, but is this amplifier that much different than this other amplifier? Are they really multi-band compressors? That's another thing that I'm finding out is not as much as I thought. There's kind of a curve to it frequency wise, but it tends to act the same regarding frequency. So it's kind of hard to say. I think maybe I'll make a video with an O-scope and we'll discuss this more.
Rev Gen Red amp model. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I have that amp right here, and that's the one I'm going to use as the example later in this video. The folks at Line 6 have already modeled the nonlinearities, and you might say, what's a nonlinearity? Well, it's going to be the behavior of that amp depending on the input that's put into it. So if I pick the strings softer, how is an amp going to behave versus if I pick the strings harder? If I roll my volume knob back, how is it going to respond to those guitar pickups hitting the front end with less signal versus, you know, maybe full on? And is it going to clean up? Is it going to have a certain quality?
These are all this is where it matters to me too. Like really, if this is use the scope. You know, if these non-linearities are that much different, you know, and we're just getting the impulse response, how close are we really going to get? And I always thought, man, they're starting to get close, but I really have the weirdest. I tried the different DSPs, the guitar amp modeling plugins and stuff, and they have different. Some of them have such different feels to them, like the distortion just seems different to me. And I just can't match some of these up to each other. There seems to be like a couple different types, and they kind of feel the same-ish if in one type versus the other type. It's hard to explain, but yeah, I'm not quite able to get the Helix to sound like Bias, for instance, for the most part.
Of distortion? Is it going to have a certain compression characteristic to it? Those are all things that change based off of the input, and those are the non-linearities. So one thing that these tone match presets cannot do beyond what's already baked into the actual amp model that's in the Helix is it cannot copy or recreate the non-linearities of the amp that is claiming to be tone matched. I think that's the biggest myth that needs to be kind of debunked. We are at the mercy of whatever is already baked into that particular Helix amp model and how the folks at Line 6
I mean, I've done so many EQ matching videos. We're basically doing what he's going to be doing. And even with the EQ, I can't get the distortion to quite act the same or feel the same.
Already created it to behave and react to our playing. What we can do with an impulse response is essentially, in the way that an impulse response is used in the Helix, very, very, very short, is we can impart frequency domain information, very detailed EQ settings that are going to be affected by actually dealing with. So here we are over in Cubase, and I have a little bit of a maybe odd looking.
Now, the weird thing is with Revolver, I was able to get that bias amp exactly how it sounded using their tone capture thing. And I don't know if that one's nonlinear or not. It used different volume test tones. So that's an interesting question. And where are they, by the way, now? Like, have they remember there was an announcement that the Revolver there's some big things happening with Revolver. Let's just take a look real quick. So now it's under Audio Media Research instead of Peavey, right? And so that's Scott. Now, there was a product. Let's see. So there's Revolver. But there was something going on. Yeah, see, I'm not sure what I can talk about. But they definitely have a way to make things really work awesome. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. I should shut up, but I'll talk to you later about this. But this audio cloning technology, it was definitely able to get exactly what I wanted out of the amp I was trying to model. And something over at Audio Assault is doing something similar, I hear. Okay, so let me go back to
project here. I have 4 tracks, one called Guitar DI, one called Rev Gen 100. Magic going on here, down now, and it's just outlining kind of the average frequency response of what's going on with this. And I'll let this just go through maybe one more time. At the end, when I hit stop, it's just going to capture what
Should
this sound like the reference we came through the reel. So pretty interesting stuff. We can see how different it is right now. So I'll just let that pass through. Maybe another one time after this pass completes.
now you know apply whatever the curve is.
Okay, we will stop that now. Now, one thing here, we can fine tune this. I actually don't want the amount at 10%, which is the default setting. I want it at 100%, and I want no smoothing at all. I want this to be as detailed as possible. So 0% on the smoothing, 100% on the amount. Now, when we listen back to the processed sound of Helix Native, I'm going to turn Match EQ off, and you'll hear that same awful abrasive sound of the Helix Rev model with no speaker cab on it. When I engage Ozone Match EQ, we should get something extremely close to what the RevGen 100R capture sounded like, or what it actually sounds like recorded. So let's do this. Let's listen, and listen carefully. You won't even have to listen very carefully to when I engage Ozone Match EQ.
Yeah.
What a difference, right? Now, has it accurately captured? Well, we don't know, but I'm going to tell you the one thing that everybody must do, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves when people are comparing different sounds online, is they don't match the volume. If the volumes are not
Don't compare things when the volumes aren't pretty closely matched, or you're gonna
matched
trouble.
to an extremely close tolerance, then
So anyway, he goes in and shows you how to make the impulse out of this thing if you really want to watch. So this is Jason Sadites, I don't know. Helix Tone Match Presets, Facts versus Myth. He tells you how he recovers the impulse. Honestly, I wouldn't do it this way. I would go over to Jason Zadora, and he has a video called How to Make Impulse Responses from Guitar Cabinet Plugins for Free. And he has an actual downloaded spike that you can just stick on and do this really easily. No need to do the tones and deconvolving and stuff. You just clean it up and you got your impulse already done. That's it for me this week. Well, it's actually been an hour. I will see you guys next week, and hopefully actually have some things hanging in the air that hopefully we can really start talking about next week. So